So again, today the Developing an Evaluation Plan webinar will be conducted by Jan Perez, Research and Education Specialist for the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems at UC Santa Cruz. I'll be facilitating the webinar. I'm Kristen Aldrich, the National Technical Assistance Manager, actually, with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. And I'll start with a quick overview before we get into developing an evaluation plan for the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program of the USDA grant program. So first, just to go over some technical details here, you can find audio controls if you're experiencing any difficulties with your audio connection on the top left-hand toolbar in WebEx. You can also send any questions that you might have using the chat box. So everyone will be muted when they enter the webinar presentation. But if you do have a question, we'll have time at the end of the presentation to take any questions and address questions that have come in. And again, you're welcome to use that chat feature to send your question out. And I would recommend using the drop-down bar where it says send to, so that your question goes out to all attendees so that everyone can see. You also, of course, welcome to send it to just myself, the host, or the presenter, but sometimes it can be useful for folks to see what those questions are as they're coming in. So again, to quickly introduce our presenters today, we have Jan Perez, again, Research and Education Specialist at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, and that's at UC Santa Cruz. She's been conducting evaluations over the past 20 years at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. She has evaluated beginning farmer training programs, agriculture-focused STEM programs, and farm-to-school related initiatives. She's also a co-evaluator and co-author of the forthcoming report, Cultivating the Next Generation, an evaluation of the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, 2009 to 2015, which is led by the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And again, myself, Kristen Aldrich, the National Technical Assistance Manager with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. So briefly, to look at the agenda, I'm going to do a quick overview, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation today about evaluation plan development, and again, time at the end for Q&A. To follow up, we'll be sending an email to anyone who has registered for this webinar with a survey to help evaluate the webinar, a link to the recording of this webinar and the presentation slides, along with other resources. So New Entry conducts on-the-ground work in Massachusetts with farmer training and food access initiatives. And we have a national team, of which I am a part, that provides support to food systems organizations. For BFRDP in particular, we have an education enhancement team grant from USDA to support applicants of this program. And that comes in the form of, we have developed a frequently asked questions portal. We sent out a survey to assess different aspects of the application process based on folks that have gone through it as applicants. We conduct webinars such as this one and work with partners, Jan Perez, which is one, and the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, as well as Allison Goyim, Strategic Development and Program Design Consultant. So the offerings that we have, you can read more about that on our website, nesfp.org. And we also have an online self-assessment tool, which is another piece of our technical assistance that was not previously mentioned, which you can access to help gauge your readiness for this grant program. I did also want to mention that the BFRDP grant for the upcoming grant cycle has not been announced yet. My understanding is that we are anticipating it will be released, the RFA will be released sometime next month or so, but generally in the fall is when it's typically released. And I also wanted to mention that we do have BFRDP staff member Wesley Dean on the call, who hopefully will be able to help potentially field some questions if things come up where his expertise might be of use at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jan Perez to talk more about evaluation plan development. So passing the presenter role over to Jan, and hopefully our audio connection is still functioning.
Let's see, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I hope you can. Excellent. So I noticed I had some problems hearing you when you were talking, and I don't know if that has to do with my phone connection, but so let me know if I start getting garbled. And thank you, Kristen. So as she mentioned briefly, the purpose of this webinar is to help you create an evaluation plan. This can be used either for your organization or for a specific project, and this plan can definitely be used to help you design and write your BFRDP evaluation for a proposal. So it's our hope that as a result of the presentation, you'll have a basic understanding of the steps for creating an evaluation plan, and that you'll have ideas for how to include the BFRDP requirements into that plan. We'll also be handing out, I believe as Kristen mentioned, a list of resources to help you create it. Oops, now I have to figure out how to move the slides forward. There we go. So the target audience for this presentation, it was really designed for organizations who don't do that much evaluation currently, or whose staff haven't had much or any evaluation training. It's also can be useful for those that have some evaluation experience but would just like to learn more about evaluation plans. This webinar is not targeted at those already trained in evaluation. If you are one of those people and you're here to see if there's anything else to help you with your BFRDP application regarding evaluation, you can feel free to stay on with us, or you can simply utilize the BFRDP materials that are online, particularly the RFA guidelines, and always go to whatever is out when you're writing that proposal, and use those guidelines specifically, and the outcome-based reporting guide for BFRDP, which is on their website. Ultimately, anytime you are doing a proposal for the BFRDP, you need to use these two documents that are the most current, because they can, the guidelines can also be updated. So why we're doing this webinar, the main reason is because there was requests for it in the survey we conducted. As Kristen mentioned, we did a survey to look at getting feedback about the application process, as well as identifying technical assistance needs. And evaluation was the most frequently requested topic, with about 60% wanting more information. And evaluation plans were also one of the highest rated aspects of evaluation. Another reason is that people are finding it really useful. As Kristen also mentioned earlier on, I've been part of an evaluation of the BFRDP program as a whole that's been run by the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And in that, we did a survey of project leaders from projects started between 2009 and 2012. And what we found from them, among many things, was that evaluation was way more useful for them than just reporting back to the BFRDP. Almost all of them in the 90% range said the evaluation helped them improve their program. 75% used the information for other grant proposals. And again, close to 90% continue to collect at least some of that data as they continued on. So an evaluation plan, what is it? It's basically a written document that you can use to organize what you're doing. It'll outline the purpose, the process, and the measurable items for your evaluation. It describes both how you will do it and also how you'll do the results. It's very useful to create one to help you really think through all the steps that need to happen and plan for them. It'll help you write an evaluation section of the BFRDP proposal. It'll help you plan for resource use. And it's just very helpful to return to it over time so you're not recreating the wheel throughout the process. And as I mentioned before, there's a number of resources out there to help you write a plan, and we just came up with a few, highlighted a few in the document that I'll send to you and it'll be on the website. And these range from, a short, tidy 16-page guide to how to create an evaluation plan to a 166-page one from Cornell, really exploring all the aspects of not just an evaluation, but really an organizational improvement and accountability process. There's also a number of website links to where you can find lots of resources, worksheet examples, etc. So the basic components and steps involved in creating an evaluation plan are listed here. First, you need to get clear on your purpose, why you're doing it. Then develop a frame and identify the overall evaluation questions. From there, you determine the needed information, really identifying your outcomes and indicators. The fourth is creating your data collection plan and figuring out how you'll analyze and summarize the findings, and then identifying how you're going to use those findings. So pretty much the rest of the presentation really walks through these steps. So it's really important to be clear about the purpose you have for doing the evaluation. Here's some of the most common ones. So accountability, this is generally the most frequently cited purpose. Funders generally want to know if you've met your goals, if you've done what you had the impact that you would hope to have. And again, this is one of the primary purposes of the evaluation for the BFRDP. Improving programs is another really common purpose for an evaluation, looking at how your program can be more effective or how it can better serve farmers. This focus was also included in the last BFRDP RFA. They were calling for using formative evaluation, of which gets at this. Third common use or purpose of evaluation is the rendering judgments, and that is really looking at, is the program good? Is it something you want to continue? Does it have the value that you hoped it would have? And generating or creating knowledge, a fourth purpose. This is generally a little more associated with academic research, and it's meant to identify findings that are useful beyond just one program. So second step, developing the evaluation frame. So that includes these following activities. First is describing what it is you're evaluating. So what is the program or project? It's really important to be clear about what's included and what's excluded. Using a logic model can be really helpful for this step, and I'll talk briefly about that later. Engaging stakeholders is also a really key part of defining the frame. And it's really good to get feedback from a wide variety of stakeholders. This is important for ensuring that the information you collect is both credible to them and important, since different types of information can be important to different people. So asking project partners, funders, management, and staff what they most want to know. Additionally, asking farmers what they think is important or others you're serving is really highly encouraged. Let's see. Involving stakeholders, particularly farmers, in some manner addresses the request for doing a participatory design, which was listed in the last BFRDP RFA. And I'll go a little bit more into questions you can ask later. You also really need to determine how you're going to use it, and knowing how you're going to use it really will help you develop the rest of the plan. knowing basically what information you want to use and how it will be shared will really help you refine your questions. A lot of questions people come up with are things that are interesting, but you don't actually have a plan or it doesn't really make sense to use it in some way, and so it'll help you trim down when things get a little big. So developing the overall questions is another part of developing the frame, and that's really looking at what do you really want to know? What are the overarching questions you want to answer? And there's some examples listed here, and they're broken out by whether they're summative or formative, and the most recent BFRDP RFA asked for both, so I'm defining them here. Summative means you're looking at what happened as a result of the program. So you might ask some of these following questions. For example, did the program reach its goals? The real common one. And in this case, are more people farming, are more ready to start farming, and are farmers taking actions to make them more successful? And another question might be, what else has the program done for farmers? And that's getting at maybe unintended things that you weren't prepared for, and that could be interesting to some programs. So as far as formative questions, again, a formative evaluation gets at how the program is being implemented or how it can be corrected or improved. So some of the questions for that might be, what are the strengths and the weaknesses, or is the program serving those it's meant to serve? Are farmers learning what we hoped? Oh, that slide got a little messed up. I apologize about that. It looked fine when I went through it earlier. Let's see. So next, we're talking about determining the needed information. So once you have some of your basic questions, you'll need to come up with indicators for answering them. And basically, you're getting at how will you know if you answered the question, and that's basically what your indicator is. So here's a couple examples. So if your overall question is, are farmers taking actions to be more successful, or that we hope will make them more successful? And some of the indicators you might use for that is if they developed a business plan, or if they applied, grow, received a loan, or if they've created a new enterprise on their farm. If one of your questions is to get at what are the program's strengths and weaknesses, you could just ask farmers directly about that and get their opinions. You could also do some type of pre or post assessment before and after the program. It could be a self-assessment or some other type of test-like thing, and you can see where they had the most learning and the least, and that's something that can point at different strengths or weaknesses of the program. And coming up with questions and indicators can sometimes be a challenging part of the process. There's a lot of things to choose from, and so basically, here's a few ideas or ways of generating and choosing them, and I'll go through each of these three things next. So using the BFRDP guidelines and materials, as I mentioned before, the guidelines may change. So ultimately, if you're going to apply, you need to work with that current RFA and the most current outcome-based reporting guide. But if you want to start working on your evaluation plan now, or even if you don't plan to apply for another year and want to start on a plan now, you can still look to those for ideas. And part of that is looking at how you'll be reporting this information if you receive a grant to the BFRDP and you report it into the RVS system and the report system. And the outcome-based reporting guide basically summarizes most of what you need to do for the RVS system, but there are other directions on the BFRDP website to the RVS system, so you can also look at those as well. So here are some of the basic questions to include that are discussed in the outcome-based reporting guide. And so it's being prepared for what will need to be reported later, and the BFRDP currently has set up to report the number of people that you've served towards these 3 goals, of those you've helped to start farming, help prepare to start farming, and those you've helped improve their farming success. And even though the way it's currently set up is to just report the number of people you've served towards those goals, these can also be really useful outcomes and indicators to track as well, to see how many people actually did start farming and how many people state that they are more prepared to start farming. And farmer behaviors are one of the main ways that the RVS system tracks farmer outcomes, and they're really interested in what behavior changes have happened that would lead to farming success. So they list these 4 kind of categories of behaviors and give some examples. And so these can definitely be used to brainstorm your indicators. They go in order of complexity. So understanding something is, again, something that happens right after a program, and implementing something may happen more down the road. Another aspect of the RVS system they're looking for is success stories and quotes from farmers. So looking at farmer stories and what they got out of the program, or even asking open-ended questions, getting at, how did this program help you? What are you able to do now? Those are the types of things that would be great to ask, and you'll be able to report there as well. So stakeholder feedback, I talked about that a little bit before, but it can also help you really also get at these outcomes and indicators. As I mentioned before, it's great to ask questions and allow them to help you frame the overall evaluation. And so questions 1 and 2 here kind of get at that. If there's not quite the timing to do that, at least getting feedback on how they would know that a question is answered. So kind of the sub-questions there. Or even the last one, how would you know if farmers are successful or more ready to farm? Those can be really good things to ask to get ideas of what people think are meaningful indicators. In using a logic model or theory of change, it can also be a really useful way to generate some ideas. Some people do also a pathway model, and that's similar. It has some slight differences. Generally, these tend to answer kind of the evaluation question of, did the program meet its objectives or desired outcomes? So we're really looking at what are the outcomes of the program and then coming up with indicators based on that. So let's see. These can also really, potentially help you create stronger programming, because you'll be kind of thinking through both what you're doing and what it leads to. Particularly with a logic model, it works starting with what are your inputs, what are you creating, and what are the activities? What are you going to do? Are you doing workshops? Are you, creating a mentorship program, doing networking activities? Those are kind of what you do. Then thinking about kind of logically what you hope will be the participation of the outputs from that maybe 100 people will go through this particular program, the products you might create as a result, and then thinking about the next logical pieces. So what do you hope happens right after that, which would be the short-term outcomes, that maybe people learn or understand something, and then on to medium and long-term, and I'll discuss those actually a little more in a moment. Theory of change model is really similar, but it can look at it slightly differently, and often it'll start by looking at your overall outcome you really want to see. So say successful farmers is your final outcome you want, and then you work backwards based on what has to happen for them to be successful, and keep working back. The theory of change models are really meant to explain the how and why you expect these outcomes. And again, I have some references in the resources to doing these. So here's a little bit more about the outcomes. One really important thing to think about is it's really good to think about how they happen over time. And ideally, creating a larger evaluation plan for your organization, you might think about all three of these. If you're just going to do something within the confines of a 3-year BFRDP project, you should have at least the first two, both short-term and medium-term. And the definitions here are what we used for that larger BFRDP evaluation. People definitely define them differently. So for short-term outcomes, that's looking at changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, awareness, or intentions. And again, this is expected during or at the end of a training or education activity. Medium-term outcomes are looking at what people did with that change in knowledge, attitudes, and skills, and hopefully they went and took it and did something, so these changes in behaviors, or that they had some type of immediate impact from those actions. So this can include starting to farm or experiencing increased economic viability or well-being. But again, in a more short-term, within a couple of years of, 1 to 2 years of maybe the intervention. Long-term outcomes are usually considered changes in social, economic, or environmental conditions. And again, these are generally way beyond the BFRDP funding timeline. We also looked at that, or we're thinking about it in terms of starting to farm can actually take quite a while, particularly in areas with really high cost of land. Can be quite a barrier to farming, and it could take, several years before someone actually gets started farming independently. And same with being successful, maybe something you actually want to track over a longer period of time. So here's some examples that'll be in our forthcoming report that'll be out in, I think, 2 weeks now. That was part of the evaluation of the larger BFRDP program. And these are just some example outcomes in the short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And these are in the appendix in a logic model that you can go and refer to. And here's thinking about the short-term, medium-term in terms of the RVS system suggested kind of indicator language. So understanding, again, is generally a short-term outcome. Implementing, such as starting a farm, maybe creating a new enterprise on a farm would be considered medium-term. And then anything around developing and deciding could potentially go either way depending on what it is. Another important part of an evaluation plan, particularly what you share with the BFRDP in a proposal, is to include both the number and % of people you hope will reach the different outcomes. Could also be averages if you're doing some kind of that type of data collection. And now let's talk a little bit more about collecting data. And again, this is an important part of a plan, to be clear about how you plan to do this and to be able to share this in a proposal as well. So there's 4 rough primary methods. So there's surveys, interviews, more in-person interviews, focus groups or group discussions, observation or record and document review, and most likely be wanting to use the first 2 of those. There's thinking about how much you want to be quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative, using numbers, is really important for accountability purposes, how many reached certain goals. And qualitative is really important to get at the stories, to really understand how the programs impact people, what they think of them, what they're learning maybe. So both of those are important in thinking about how to have both. And then related to the short-term, medium-term outcomes, You'll likely want to be doing something that's both at the end of a session, which is usually the easy thing to do because you have a captive audience, or even the end of a multi-session type of program or year-long program. But to get at medium-term outcomes, what people did with what they learned, you often really need to do some type of follow-up survey or interviews after people have left, which can require some keeping track of contact information. And in the survey we did of project leaders for the larger BFRDP evaluation, we asked them about what they considered best practices for them in collecting evaluation information, and we asked people who felt that they had their evaluation was working for them or mostly working for them. And there was two themes that came up in their open-ended responses, and one was to use direct contact with farmers to collect data. And this includes doing surveys in person or in a group, conducting one-on-one interviews or running focus groups. And people mentioned they found it was a great way to get both qualitative and quantitative information. Focus groups actually served a double purpose, allowing farmers another opportunity to network. One person even mentioned, doing it really unofficially. They had a cook-off where everybody would gather together and just have an open-ended discussion. And just to note that not all leaders agree that a number of people also did online surveys. And then the second theme that came out is that it's important to maintain connection with participants over time. And this both, if they're more connected, they're more likely to respond to a survey. You're also more likely to be having accurate contact information or keeping in touch or keeping on top of contact information. And building and maintaining trust was another theme. So writing survey or interview questions. So there's a lot of ways to do it, and I just wanted to show you a few different examples. So here, if the evaluation question, or in this case, kind of a desired outcome, are participants more prepared to start farming? Here's two example indicators. One is, have they developed a business plan, or they have an increase in confidence to farm. And then here's two different example questions. The first one just gets at the yes, no. They have a plan or they don't have a plan. The other gets at the degree of which someone agrees. So in this case, it's how much do you agree with the following statement? The training program has increased my confidence to start a successful farm. Here's another example. If you want to look at, say, improved economic viability, just a note, this doesn't quite fit into the RVS logic model, but it's still something you could report to the BFRDP through the report system, and it's definitely something that other farmers may want to know about, or are interested in your program, or you have other funders that would want to know about it. And as far as indicators, there's a whole lot of ways you could do indicators for this. I just grabbed one for this example, which is that there's an increase in household income. And here's 4 different ways, in a sense, you could ask that. Again, one is just a straight yes, no, asking people's opinion on if they have it or they don't. The next one is also, their opinion on an increase in household income, but it's on a scale from significantly to not at all. So that gives you a little bit more information about how much it's been helpful, where the first question doesn't get at that. The third one gets more specifically, again, it's an opinion question, and it gets at maybe the actual numbers, but in a range, and that could be something you may want to report more specifically or know more specifically. Pre-post questions are often a really great way to get information, to ask a real direct question both before and after, and in this case it might be how much did they contribute to household income in the previous year as they enter the program, and then ask them that a couple years later about their most recent year. The only problem with that with this particular question is people don't often want to give you those exact numbers, but with other kinds of topics you can ask, you can do that type of pre-post. So again, it's also good to think about how you're going to analyze the data ahead of time, using percents. Certain data lends itself more to average medians or modes or standard deviation to understand more the spread. Qualitative, you can use a thematic analysis, which is reading the open-ended questions and just identifying what are the most common responses or what are the themes that pop out. And here's just a quick example of, for those questions I listed above for increased economic viability, different ways you might report it. And finally, reporting the information, as I said originally, up front, knowing how you're going to use it is really key. And here's where you can also write that down and be really clear about it. If you get a BFRDP grant, you'll use the RVS and report system to report. So again, as we've mentioned, using those documents to make sure you're aimed at that goal is good. Thinking about who you might want to present or create summaries for. Do you want to share information with incoming or prospective students about what others have received from your programs? Do you want to report to other funders? Do you want to make summaries available for the general public? Thinking about, do you want to write a report? Do you want to just put some basic outcomes on your website? Thinking that through, as I mentioned, can be really helpful. Grant writing is another purpose. Again, making sure that that's whatever you get is connected with your grant writer. And last but by no means least is bringing back results to staff. Are there things that you would like to see going on differently, improvements to the program? Where I work at the Center for Agroecology, we have a 6-month intensive apprenticeship program, training program, and as part of a BFRDP grant, we started doing a pre-post self-assessment right at the beginning and then at the end that look at 16 different topics such as fertility management and weed management. And then I analyze the results and take them to the staff, and they get to see what the average scores were at the beginning and then at the end. And it shows where they had the most improvement and the least improvement, and the staff have really liked it, and they use it to change and adapt what they do each year. And we've continued to do it even after our grant has been over. And a final reminder, which I've said several times, but just want to make sure it's really clear, is when you're developing an evaluation specifically for a BFRDP proposal, you need to follow whatever are the current instructions. And you need to go look online at the outcome-based reporting guide on the BFRDP website. It could be updated over time and may have some new instructions. Also, utilizing some of the ideas presented here can ensure or help the evaluation be useful for your organization as well. So now we can take some questions. So Kristen, do you have anything?
Thanks so much, Jan, for that wonderful presentation, first of all. So I don't see any questions that have been chatted in the chat box yet. If folks do have questions, feel free to use the chat box. You can send your question to all attendees if you like, for everyone to be able to see the question, or even if it goes just to me, I'm happy to read them back and Jan can address them. So yeah, again, not seeing any questions yet. As just another reminder to all the folks on the webinar, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar along with the presentation slides following this presentation today. Hopefully those will go out, if not by the end of the day today, certainly tomorrow. So you should be seeing that shortly, and that will go out to all registrants and attendees of the webinar. We'll also be posting the recorded webinar to our website, along with resources that are available to folks regarding the BFRDP program. So still not seeing any questions coming through. Oh, here's one that just came in. How commonly do BFRDP projects utilize an evaluation consultant? That's a great question.
Wesley.
Yeah, I was going to say. So we have Wesley Dean on the call. I have unmuted Wesley if he does have a response, which might be kind of dependent on. Yeah.
I don't actually know the answer to that question either. I mean, I've certainly seen some projects that use external evaluators. I hate to do this, but I know Desi was listening in at one point. Maybe she has a better idea than I do. And if you do, Desi, do you mind typing it into the chat box? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I do see Desi in our attendance here, and I can unmute you as well if you'd like to respond. But yeah, we can certainly get your response over chat. So yeah, just to reiterate, the question is how commonly do BFRDP projects use an evaluation consultant?
So in the meantime, I mean, what I can tell you is that there is a move agency-wide towards encouraging external evaluators as part of a proposal. We don't require it in a lot of programs yet, but we do require it in some of our programs, and I expect that as we move forward, you'll be seeing that more often. So, you know, it's certainly not a requirement for BFRDP, but there are clearly certain things to be gained from having somebody, not you, evaluating your own project.
Sure.
Wesley, I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'm interested in knowing how much, I guess that's a goal to have that outside evaluator do it all compared to maybe just providing guidance.
Again, you know, these are going to be, I mean, how something like that is evaluated itself within the grant panel is going to have a lot to do with how you laid out your very own evaluation plan. And so it's kind of hard to speak to that in general. It may cost more. So, you know, you just have to take you just have to make these calculations. The more involved you have an external evaluator, the more it may cost you in terms of your overall budget. So part of this, I think, really comes down to whether or not you have the direct expertise in-house. And, I mean, above and beyond whether or not you have the direct expertise in-house, I mean, you may still want an external evaluator because an external evaluator will have bring a separate set of eyes and also a different form of objectivity to the analysis. So just, you know, take all those things in mind, you know, and keep them in mind when you make these decisions. But right now, we're not requiring an external evaluator for BFRDP. So make that decision, you know, based upon what it actually brings to your evaluation plan as you present it in your proposal.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for that insight. And we did have one other question come through. I'm not quite sure what it means, unfortunately, so I just asked for a little more clarification. Which they just responded. So the question is in regards to, I guess, comparing, I think this is around comparing the BFRDP grant program to the Community Food Projects grant program. So the original question was, how does this compare to community food if that incorporated training new farmers and more? And then the additional clarification, we are working on community food project, but with a training for new farmers. Yeah, still kind of trying to determine how to address that question. If training new farmers and alternative energy practices. This might be a bit more nuanced about your project in particular, so you're welcome to follow up with me and I guess also if I hadn't pointed this out previously, we have my contact information, kristen.aldrich@tufts.edu, as well as Jan's, if you have any follow-up questions that we haven't addressed. But yeah, in regards to this specific community projects versus BFRDP question, maybe send that my way and we can kind of sort out more details of what you're asking about in regards to your project. I guess I'll take the opportunity to quickly mention that Community Food Projects, some of you might be aware of, is another USDA grant program that's separate and different from BFRDP. There could potentially be overlap in terms of, as we're hearing about this project, there is a component around training new farmers, but it is a completely separate grant program with different requirements and elements to it.
And a completely different national program leader. I'm not really familiar, except in the most abstract sense, with that program, or the most general sense.
Yeah. Great. So any other questions? I haven't seen any further come through in the chat here. But we'll give maybe just another moment or so for any follow-up questions that might come in. Again, you're more than welcome to send anything my way, and I'm happy to address any questions or field them as appropriate to the proper experts about the BFRDP program. But again, just to reiterate, that RFA has not yet been announced, but as far as I know, still anticipating a fall release for that request for application.
Correct.
Great. Okay, let's see. Yeah, still no questions coming through, so it's around about 2 o'clock here, so I suppose we can leave it there. And again, feel free to send any questions or thoughts to me or Jan. You'll be seeing an email coming from us shortly with the recording and additional resources regarding evaluation planning. But it's great of all of you, I'd like to say, to be thinking about these aspects of your application well in advance. It's always best to start as early as possible in putting together your proposal. We'll be offering additional webinars, as well as NIFA staff will be offering a webinar as well when the RFA announcement does come out with other application details and information. So hopefully we'll be able to address other questions at that time. But I will wrap it up there. So thanks again, everyone, for attending and participating today. We hope this was useful in your evaluation planning, and best of luck with your BFRDP applications.
And real quick, I just want to thank both of you, Kristen and Jan. And one point I wanted to make is for those of you, when you do put your application together, there is an outcomes guide that will be linked to in the RFA, and take a look at that guide. I might be tweaking it in the next little bit, but it'll be ready and all cleaned up and slightly updated when the RFA comes out. So that should be very helpful for you when you put your application together.
Wonderful.
So thanks for a great presentation.
Thanks so much, Wesley, and thanks again to Jan and everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.